So my name is Therese and we have DID or Dissociative Identity Disorder. So this has been quite a requested video. Most of our story is online on a YouTube documentary. However, that was filmed prior to being open about our DID diagnosis. One of the questions I do get after people have watched that video is, what is your journey? How did you come to realise that you have DID? So I thought I would sit down with you guys and share. What is DID? So I'll give a brief description of what DID is, and then I will expand more on it in further videos. So DID is Dissociative Identity Disorder. It comes from ongoing and prolonged childhood trauma before the age of 9. And it fragments the brain into different parts or alters. So I will use parts and alters interchangeably throughout this. The same thing, just different terminology. So the amount of trauma causes the brain to stay fragmented, and it fragments it to the point where the different parts have amnesia between them. And each part or alter develop separately. They have their own memories, they have their own personality, they have their own sort of likes, dislikes, and they can be more or less developed. It's really a creative way for the brain to be able to cope with that enormity of the trauma that the child has been through. Alters or parts are formed throughout childhood and ongoing. I would say that the awareness of parts or alters for us began in our teen years. I began to suspect that we might have parts or start to become aware of it in our teen years. We met someone with DID online, and I realised later that some of our parts had been coming out and talking to some of the other parts or alters of this person. I also realised that there was different handwritings in our journal, and there's different parts writing stuff. And so at that point I was like, maybe we have parts, maybe we've got parts. So I decided to go to our parents. I went to my mother and I said, I think I might have multiple personality disorder, which is what it used to be called, until I realised it's not a personality disorder, it's a dissociative disorder. They changed the name anyway. So I went to my mother and I was like, I think I have this. She was very sort of receptive and was like, okay, all right. And so I was like, oh, phew, okay. They're gonna sort of look into it and whatnot. However, she went and had a chat with our biological father, who then they had a discussion, and he deemed that, having multiple personalities or parts is demon possession. So he was like, DID is demon possession and you don't have it. So anyway, there was a lot of shame around that. There was a lot of shame, regret, and a part formed from that had huge denial that anything had happened, or that we had parts at all. So that part was very strongly came in, and it basically just shut down any awareness that there might be parts or alters or anything like that, and it helped us be able to continue and cope through the coming years. So we didn't have any awareness from that point on until we started therapy again, actually. Life was confusing. So for me, there's minimal trauma memories. I have some, but not a lot. I couldn't quite understand why there was such an intense eating disorder, or why there was this restricting and then there's binging and purging, or parts that we're trying to unalive. I didn't know that until later in the looking back, when I realised that it was actually parts that were doing these behaviours. But at that time, for me it was just confusing, because I couldn't understand why, if my life had been so good and I hadn't had that much trauma, I couldn't understand why things had gotten so bad. We ended up to a point where I knew that if we didn't get help, that we're going to unalive and we're going to end up not being around for much longer. So it was at that point that I decided to reach out and get help, and we went to a long-term residential program. It was probably from then onwards, with various therapists, we started to then become aware of parts. At this point we hadn't been diagnosed with DID, but we were working with with internal parts and internal family systems, which is the whole model. We did achieve a lot of healing and a lot more stability, which I'm super grateful for, because without any of that, we would not be here today. It was in 2021 that we needed a list of diagnoses for some paperwork. We were seeing a psychologist at the time. Psychologists can't diagnose, so she referred us to a clinical psychologist in the same practice, and he sat down with us and did several sessions, and one of the diagnoses that we received was DID. Yeah, that's sort of how our diagnosis came about, and our story in very, very brief. I mean, since that diagnosis, there has been a slight shift in the way that we do work in therapy. We still use a lot of the trauma-informed IFS sort of stuff, but we sort of just make it our own, I suppose. So we're definitely in a much, much better place than, you know, we were maybe 13, 14 years ago. But, you know, the work is always ongoing. It's okay to keep working on yourself and to keep growing and to keep learning and stuff. I should also say that we have 24 known parts. I say known parts because they're the ones that we've become aware of, and I've kept a list as I've slowly become aware of parts. I also say known parts because, you know, sometimes you do come across a part that, you know, you weren't aware of before, and so when we become aware of a part, we just add it to the list. The age ranges of our parts range from young up until 33, so there's a whole range of different ages. For us, as far as I know, all the parts are female. For some systems there is different genders and things like that. We have been quite open about our life for many years, but the one thing that we haven't been open about is the diagnosis of DID, or, you know, talking about parts or any of that kind of stuff. It wasn't until last year that we started doing live streaming on TikTok, where we would just talk about a bit about our life. We'd showcase some of the fashion design, you know, just sit and chat with people while we did hand sewing and stuff like that. So one night someone entered our live stream, and up until this point we hadn't been open about our having DID or anything like that. They just happened to say, like, we're a system, we have DID and we're a system, and one of the parts stepped forward and was like, so are we. That was the very spontaneous way that we began to talk online. Now that has required some negotiating in our system. Some parts are comfortable talking about it online, some parts are not, so we've sort of had to negotiate how that all looks internally. So why do we talk about DID and this side of it? We want to share our story so that, you know, people who are experiencing similar things, who do have this diagnosis or something similar, that they feel less alone. I'd like to be able to use the combination of our experience and also the training that I've done in complex trauma, and studying to be a with a Masters of Counselling, and I'd just like to be able to use that to just bring awareness and bring education, and hopefully show people that it's not like the movies. We are people who've been through trauma. We also want to be able to educate and show people what it's really like. You know, DID is an umbrella term, and underneath there's so many different individual experiences, and it looks different from system to system. So there are overarching criteria to be diagnosed with it. However, underneath that there's a whole range of experiences and ways that it looks. So I hope that answers some of your questions of how we have gotten to where we are today. And if you would have any suggestions of what you'd like to see next, let me know.